The messages in that group chat between the highest-ranking members of the US government certainly showed what they really believe about Europe. J.D. Vance, the vice president, says he hates bailing out Europe. Pete Hegseth, the US defense secretary, called the continent pathetic. When confronted about the truth of the messages, Hegseth had this to say.
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage.
Well, for all that, Jeffrey Goldberg, the journalist who has found himself on that chat group, getting all of this war information, his story seems to be rather accurate. This is the Republican Speaker of the House in Congress, Mike Johnson. This is what he said.
I just was with the president in the Oval Office just now. The administration is addressing what happened. Apparently an inadvertent phone number made it onto that thread. They're going to track that down and make sure that it doesn't happen again. What you did see, though, I think, was top-level officials doing their job, doing it well, and executing on a plan with precision. That mission was a success. No one was jeopardized because of it. We're grateful for that, but they will certainly, I'm sure, make sure that doesn't happen.
But
again.
they're talking on signal, not in a skiff.
I'm not going to characterize what happened. Clearly, I think the administration has acknowledged it was a mistake, and they'll tighten up and make sure it doesn't happen again. I don't know what else you can say about that.
Should Mike Waltz and Hegseth be disciplined?
No.
It's the Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Let's welcome Kristine Berzina, the Managing Director of the Transatlantic Security Team at the German Marshall Fund. Hello to you, Kristine.
Good to see you.
Hi. So, look, your organisation supports and defends the Atlantic Alliance. So are you concerned about seeing Vice President Vance and the Defence Secretary rubbishing America's European allies like this?
It certainly isn't the smoothest waters for transatlantic ties right now, but also the kind of friction we're seeing is in line with friction we've seen for decades. And it has to do with how much the Europeans are willing to invest in their own security and how much of their own autonomy and leadership they're going to take for issues that the United States sees as primarily being European in nature. Sometimes these characterizations are entirely unfair, and I think you have seen oversight and rude behavior from Vance and other administration officials that discounts the efforts that Europeans have made, that Brits have made, in protecting transatlantic security, protecting American security in the Middle East, for example. But the fundamental lines of the argument are not necessarily new. They're simply presented in a far less palatable way by this administration.
Well, it's certainly true, isn't it, to say that American administrations going back decades have felt that the balance was in the wrong place, that European partners were just getting too much out of America when it came to mutual defence, not putting enough in. There's nothing new about that. But here we got, clearly stated, not just people being resentful about that, but being full of hostility, even hate. And you've got the vice president apparently reluctant to strike the Houthis in Yemen in defending a global trading route because it would help the Europeans. That's a new level, surely.
Well, is it because that he doesn't think that the global trading route is important, or does he not think that it's the United States that should take the step as opposed to the Europeans? I think there's probably a difference in that. Would he have welcomed more European action? On some ways, yes. But something that I see sitting here in Washington is that on the one hand, Europeans should be stepping up more, say the Americans. But any time that Europe tries to take steps forward, these aren't quite exactly what America had in mind. And so the United States currently is in an identity crisis. On the one hand, they want Europe to do more, to pay more, to be the ones to take a hit, for example, in Yemen, rather than the United States. On the other hand, that would mean the U.S. would lose control in when and how such an attack would happen.
Yes.
They would lose control over a lot of the operational and also strategic lines. And that is something America also doesn't want. And so the U.S. is stuck between wanting to tell the Europeans what to do, but wanting the Europeans to do more without the United States. And it simply won't be able to have it both ways.
Right. So an identity crisis, as you put it in Washington. But you, more than most people, can perfectly well see why national leaders in Europe, members of NATO, are really quite worried at this point, seriously worried at this point, about the future of the North Atlantic Security Alliance. If it has a future,
I don't think that transatlantic cooperation is over. I think it's simply going through something that will result in a very different kind of cooperation and pattern in the future. So we're at a moment of transition. We're turning a corner, and there are lots of people who are extremely alarmed about this, in particular because the rhetoric, the speed, and the offense that is coming, the emotional offense that is coming from this administration, is quite difficult to bear. Does the United States still have strategic interests on the European side of the Atlantic? Yes. Does it want to be primarily responsible for them? No. I think there is a good thing for Europe to do to increase its own defenses, to invest more in defense. I think the British leadership and now cooperation with the European Union, with European entities, with Turkey is incredibly important and a very welcome step. My concern is that any kind of US transition away from its primary role in Europe would happen so quickly that Europe wouldn't be ready yet to take over the responsibilities it will need to. So the critical question for transatlantic cooperation is not a rebalancing of responsibilities. That clearly is coming, but the question of how quickly the United States will force Europe to take on this role and do the adversaries, whether they be Russia, China, bad actors in the Middle East, whether they take advantage of this moment of transition and in some way of European strategic weakness to inflict significant harm on Europe and on the Brits.
Yeah, well, that is clearly a worry. I mean, the European NATO members are acting, maybe belatedly, but they are acting to strengthen their own defence and each other's defence. Now, what about those thoughts? It appears that America is in many ways keen to normalise relations with Russia as far as possible, opening up areas of business collaboration. Europe much less so. What do you think?
The United States is certainly seeking new opportunities with Russia. If we look at what the Trump administration has put out publicly with relation to Russia, it is an enormous carrot. Everything that has come before through the Biden administration was sticks. One could argue they weren't big enough. There weren't enough military arms. The sanctions regimes were not enforced enough. They weren't hard enough. But what Trump is putting on the table right now are incentives for Russia to change course and to turn over a new leaf with the United States, in particular on economic opportunity. This is jarring because Russia is very much the aggressor and maintains its role as aggressor in Ukraine while also threatening the rest of Europe in its rhetoric frequently. Does that mean that Putin and Trump are going to be best friends strategically for here on out? Again, I think that's a leap pretty far. Does Trump want to get Putin on his side, and will he be willing to make concessions that perhaps others have not been willing to make simply to get to a ceasefire and a fast ceasefire and for the ability to get the US out of having this big important role in Europe? Perhaps. But does that mean that Russia and the United States can be partners, can be close allies in the future? I do not see Russia wanting that because Russia would have to then jeopardize its close relationships with China, with North Korea, with Iran, and its ability to play a spoiler role or a troublemaker role globally. And that is something that Russia thrives in doing and likes the agency and independence it gains from being a buddy to many of these bad actors.
Yeah, I mean, look, Steve Witkoff, the US envoy, he's spoken openly, hasn't he, about Russia and America cooperating on mineral extraction. There are obvious risks to go with that, assuming it is even practicable.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing right now is for Witkoff and the Trump administration to seek to open doors for new American investment. Now, the administration can open doors, but an entirely different question is whether industry is going to walk through that door. Russia has not been an excellent investment environment for many Western companies in a long time. And the ability to have the security of the investments, to feel as though the business environment is stable, that it is comfortable, that it is responsible, that there is access to a judiciary that is going to be able to litigate any business questions, that is very important for investors. Russia has a terrible track record on these issues. And when it comes to the question of where will American companies seek minerals, just because a door is open does not necessarily mean that American companies are going to walk through that door and invest their money in Russia. Certainly, there are going to be areas where business could be possible in the future, but that does not mean that just because Trump would like there to be new opportunities with Russia, that the calculation that industry makes, that business makes, will align with his political desires.
All right, Kristine Berzina from the German Marshall Fund. Thank you for your thoughts.